Okay, thank you all for joining. My name is Akshay Sharan. I'm a cafe fellow here at CGU. I work at the Center for Academic and Faculty Excellence. Um, I'm really excited to speak about this topic today, but also more excited to hear from all of you in our allocated discussion time. um, about what your thoughts are and how educators are, and what our ideas are for sort of designing and co-creating classroom policies for the use, the misuse, or the lack of use or non-use of AI. And so I want to start off in today's conversation is sort of pretty simple, but we're kind of going to go into depth a bit. We've tried to create a framework here at the Center for Academic and Faculty Excellence to help educators figure out when they need a policy and what kind of policy they need. So I'm going to spend the first few minutes talking about why we're here, right? What is this problem? Why are we even talking about this? Why do I need to have a webinar on this? Um, the most important part of today's meeting, which is how should I decide what to do about AI in my classroom? This is from the perspective of educators deciding how to acknowledge and how to communicate their thoughts and their use cases for AI in the classroom. Then we're going to sort of delve deeper into this. Um, Again, as part of the framework, we developed five possible outcome strategies or types of policies that we can implement, um, which we're going to discuss for 20 minutes as well, following which we'll have sort of a discussion section where I would like you all to share your thoughts. Somewhere in the middle here, there's going to be a breakout room for you to discuss the ideas uh, that we explore. Um, and yeah, so thank you all for being here, and let's get started. So why are we here? Right? There's been a clear boom in the use of AI tools, particularly softwares like ChatGPT, Gemini, Notebook LLM, and these are just a few, Claude. These are just a few, right? So in the past few years, there's been a sharp increase in the number of tools, especially those that are publicly accessible. Um, and this does two things in my understanding, and also according to social psychology in some ways. It creates this sort of immense uncertainty about our condition in terms of unemployment in certain sections of society. So, for example, if you would webinar that I hosted on ethical, we did- there's differential impact. More importantly, this also so like I was saying last time, we discussed that there's differential impacts of unemployment across different sectors, and it generally creates this sort of sense of unease when technology starts to sort of take over different facets of our life, right? And so that's why we need to have this conversation. And the second is this idea of there's this sort of mild insecurity. This is something that I've discussed with my colleagues here at CGU, um, which is that can we do what AI does? And this sort of creates this insecurity in us. And then the question arises that what do we do about this? What do we do about this uncertainty? How can we resolve this uncertainty, right? And so I believe that whether or not you're pro or anti-AI, whether you have strong opinions or not so strong opinions, all humans seek certainty is something that we already know. And so that's why it's important to address this question, particularly in the context of higher education. I'm just going to briefly recap something that we spoke about in the previous webinar as well, which is what are the threats and benefits of using AI in the classroom, right? So some of these thoughts are taken from an educational historian, Dr. Diane Rabowich, but the others are sort of things that experts in the field have been saying and have been discussing ever since these AI tools have sort of taken over, right? So coming to the threats, there's clearly a commercialization of the classroom that's happening, right? AI is usually for-profit driven, and most of these tools are privately owned. And so the question begs that should we have for-profit institutions in the classroom at all? And is that something that we're okay with? And that's a conscious decision that needs to be made um, about the use of AI. The second most important thing is this idea of regulation and accountability, right? Who do you hold accountable? The people who run some of these softwares and these tools refuse to take accountability, saying that these are autonomous softwares or autonomous tools, right? Which creates a new level of challenges which we haven't seen before. Um, and then begs the most important, again, the most important stakeholder in this entire situation is students, right? So student privacy is heavily affected because who holds the data, right? And what about the actual purpose of why students come to school in the first place, which is educational values, critical thinking, communication, right? All of that. So there's erosion of educational values happening according to some experts in education. And of course, I'm sure we're all aware if you've used any of these tools in the past, there's a lot of poor quality, meaningless writing that's often generated, often that's factually incorrect. I do want to acknowledge, though, that of course, a large section of the population believes that artificial intelligence tools provide an opportunity to sort of scale growth like we haven't seen before, right? Particularly in education, there are some benefits that you can imagine, like it can personalize learning. I recommend this video by Sal Khan, who runs Khan Academy, on how the use of artificial intelligence is actually solving educational crises of student to faculty ratios in denser parts of the world, and so how that can actually be beneficial. And then also it can help us reduce time that we take on less prioritized tasks, tasks that you don't think are that important, or tasks that you feel will, so I mean, they could sort of free up your mental energy for other challenges, right? Other more important challenges, as we say. And then, of course, there's a pace of change in technological advancements, and somewhere perhaps we should think about how to move along with this pace as opposed to sort of fighting the pace of change. So let's get into the sort of crux of the matter. Okay. How do I decide? How do we decide what's going to happen in the classroom? Right? Do I need a policy and what kind of policy do I need? Um, Sorry, I'm just going to check the chat box once. Yeah. Um, So there are three primary stakeholders that we'll be talking about, right? Students who usually pay, faculty who usually get paid and do a lot more, of course, which includes training, pedagogy, all of that. And then there are institutions which manage the student, the faculty, and they also, most importantly, manage impressions, right? In terms of managing impressions in the academic community and what people think of them and putting out statements favoring on for or against a particular thing, right? So if these are the three primary stakeholders, of course, there are secondary stakeholders like the parents of students, right? Um, or support staff in institutions, for example. Um, but if we were to sort of scaffold this idea of decision making, faculty in the institution. And so we design like a framework based on which I would like to play an if then game with all of you. Um, You're going to be presented a framework on the next slide is that's the sample slide which you can see, and then I'm going to share a document with you which has the instructions and the details of what you will be doing. So you'll be presented a framework with 9 questions to answer that are categorized based on the stakeholder that's directly impacted, not directly impacted, but the stakeholder that matters to the most. If more than 50% of your responses are yes at any one particular stage, then you proceed to the next stage. Okay, there are a total of 3 stages: stage one, stage two, stage three. If more than 50% of your responses at any given stage are no, then you should immediately go to choose an outcome strategy for what kind of policy you need. Okay, there are 5 outcome strategies that we're looking at, which I'm going to show you in a minute. And then once we sort of come back together in terms of once you all spend some time thinking about this, we're going to go into a breakout room where you're going to chat with a few people, and then we're going to come back and we're going to poll your findings on Zoom to see what kind of policy strategy appeals to you the most. Okay. So this is the design of how it's done. These are mostly yes or no questions. It's pretty binary outcome. Of course, some of these questions you could argue should not be binary in terms of response sets. Um, but that's absolutely something that I mean, I would think it would be great if you could sort of adapt that to your specific course. So you can see on stage one here, we have the institution or the institutional, right? Which is, does your university authorize the use of AI or not? Right? There are some universities which are explicitly stating that they are not authorizing or authorizing the use. And does your department support the use of AI is the second one. Notice that I use the word support and not the word authorize because the idea is that what is going on within the department at a normative level as well, right? So, for example, here at CGU, in some departments, conflict of ideology from like a specific department or from the university, it's tough for people to accept either one of those options, right? And so what's happening is that there are more internal, informal discussions about AI practices and AI norms within departments, right? And so we're looking at two levels here within the institution. You're looking at the university, the sort of higher up provost office, chancellor, whatever you want to call it, that level, and then your specific academic department. So the idea of this is if you respond yes to more than 50% or at least half of these, you're going to move to stage two, which is the student stage, right? And here we're asking three key questions. Does the use of AI tools align with student learning outcomes for your course? Have you asked the opinion of your students on the need for an AI policy? Yes, favorable, yes, unfavorable, and no. And would using AI tools enhance the learning experiences for students, right? So these are questions that you as an educator are responding to, but by taking the perspective of the student, right? Do you think it's actually going to help the student in these specific ways? And then if your responses to at least two of these questions are yes and favorable, then we move to stage three, which is the educator stage or the faculty stage, basically us, you, right? And there are four key questions that I think comprise this stage, right? Does the use of AI tools align with your teaching philosophy, right? Over the past several years, we've had a lot of students graduate from the TNDY Cafe sequence, which is now called Cafe sequence, the teaching certificate sequence, right? And that we sort of draft and reiterate our teaching philosophies, where sometimes some of us do speak about matters of ethics and commitment and things like that, right? And so does this use of AI tools align with your teaching philosophy? Could the tasks that you're going to have throughout the course of this semester, could they be completed without the use of AI tools? Is that a possibility? Would using AI tools significantly benefit the quality of the finished product? Like, is the thing that you're going to get at the end be significantly better than what you would get if you did not use that tool? And then the fourth sort of guiding question is, did you actually use AI tools yourself in aiding with the design of the course that you made? So I know that this framework sort of seems like, oh, like there could be more, there could be less. I'm not sure if that should go here, if that should go there. But the idea is that answering these specific guiding questions will help you make a decision of the five outcome strategies that we're going to be looking at. Okay, so before I give you time to think and go into breakout rooms, I just want to show you what the five levels of outcome strategies are that we're talking about. Okay, so there are five possible outcomes. The first outcome is that you link to a university policy on non-use, right? So a good example of this, for example, if I was to take you back to the previous slide, if on stage one, if your answer to does your university authorize the use of AI is no, then you would immediately defer to outcome one, which is linked to university policy on non-use because it's not allowed at the university level. So it doesn't really matter if students want it, if faculty wants it, because the university's already put a statement on it, right? And so in terms of decision making, it doesn't matter is what I mean. I mean, of course, it matters to the students, but in a decision making level, it does not matter. And then you would proceed to stage two, um, and so on and so forth, right? So outcome two is drafting a course policy for non-use, where you actually design a policy yourself, you write something yourself. Outcome three is drafting a course policy on limited use. Limited use is a pretty ambiguous word, I'm aware. And that's why I think that you should think of this as a spectrum, right? Think of it as a, I don't know, a 3-point scale, a 5-point scale, a 7-point scale, where it ranges from how limited to how extensive almost. Outcome four is drafting a course policy on extent of use. So I would like to differentiate here between outcome three and outcome four, right? In terms of strategies, what I'm trying to say is that outcome three is almost like uh, setting the lower limit, if that makes sense. Whereas outcome four is actually setting the upper limit of how far can you go with this, right? And that's why the separate strategies are not combined into one. And then the fifth strategy, which is my least favorite, but please feel free to consider it, which is drafting a course policy on open use of AI tools. And I'm going to show you what that language looks like to also ensure that we don't have misuse when you're recommending open use, right? These are important questions we need to ask ourselves, especially if we're planning on implementing this within the classroom. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create four breakout rooms at random. And I'm going to link a document here in the chat, which has, just give me a second, which has this entire worksheet along with the questions that you will be answering, right? So I would like you all to sort of go through this together and discuss what you think your outcome strategy would be for a course of your choice. Please tell me if you can see this. Yes, is everyone able to view?
Yeah, actually, it says I need permission,
I see.
but
Just
I
give me
can say I need that access, please, and then request access and see what happens.
just give me a second. Let me just try though. Anyone? Sorry about that, everyone. Can you try clicking on this now? Okay, lovely. So now what I want you to do is I would like you to think about this little decision tree that we had over here that we were discussing, right? And I want you to go into breakout rooms, share your decision based on the course of your choice, chat with your colleagues about what could be improved about this decision-making tree, what could be added, what could be subtracted. And then we're going to come back to the main room and share your suggestions for improvement. Thank you all for participating in that. Um, how was that? Was that enough time? Not enough time? Any thoughts? Not enough time. Yeah, I figured. I do want to acknowledge that, of course, this was only a 7 to 10 minute exercise. I did want to acknowledge that this is only a 7 to 10 minute exercise, and it's something that you will have to think about independently, but also with your own colleagues in your department, or maybe even have this conversation with your students, right? I mean, if we're all figuring it out right now as we speak as educators, then why can't students be a part of that process? And so, um, Yeah, please think about this. These are crucial questions which require a lot of introspection. It might require you revisiting your syllabi, seeing what the student learning outcomes were, revisiting your teaching philosophy to remind yourself who you are and what your philosophy really is. Um, you know. So yeah, thank you so much for that. Now I'm going to share my screen for a quick poll using Mentimeter, which is an online tool, probably uses AI, some version of AI. I don't really know. Apologies. Yeah, I don't know what to say. Um, just a sec. So there's going to be a QR code that pops up, or you can go to Mentimeter and join as well. Can everyone see my screen? And again, I mean, there's clearly no right or wrong answer here. This is just to see what kind of policies are most in demand when thinking about AI in the classroom. Are people still able to respond?
I was able to respond. I just torn between 3 and 4.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Do you want to set an upper limit? Do you want to set a lower limit? Um, yeah, so many questions to ask.
Just to let you know, I'm using my phone, so I couldn't use the QR, so I put it in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Normal. Let's see, we have some responses trickling in. We're at 6. I'm going to wait a couple of minutes in the hope of us reaching 10. Okay. So we have an even split between 3 and 4. 3 people each in this room suggest that we need to draft a limited use policy or an extent of use policy. I do want to highlight, though, that of all the 9 respondents, all 9 of us, all 9 of you said that there needs to be the draft of a policy, right? And again, I want to reiterate that that's the most important takeaway is that we need clear communication. There should not be any ambiguity in the minds of students or in the minds of faculty. Should not, as a student, be arguing with faculty members about why they're using AI in their course when the university has not stipulated use or non-use. And there's been no conversation around it, right? So yeah, of course, this works differently in different institutions. But now what I want to do with these findings and with this result is that I want to take you through some of the sample languages that you can use for these types of policies, right? So what does a policy for limited use versus extent of use actually look like? I don't think I know, but we're going to try to figure it out together today. Let me just go back to my presentation, if I can find it amongst all the tabs. Okay, lovely. So 5 outcome strategies you discussed. Let's look at the first one, right? So we're going to move outcome by outcome to see what other institutions or other educators have used in the past so far. So this is what a university policy looks like, right? This was me last night trying to identify how many universities are out there that have some kind of clear guidance. So I found Columbia University's generative AI policy that applies to the entire institution, right? So anyone that falls within the ambit of the institution has to adhere to these rules and norms, right? So specifically, they talk about procuring AI tools and softwares and how that relates to information security policies within the university, the idea of inputting confidential information, not to input any personal information or to input any information that could violate any IP contracts or conditions, right? So you can clearly see that this language is very much geared towards like safeguarding the institution per se from any threat that could emerge from student or faculty use of generative AI, right? And they go on to talk about other elements within this policy. The two pictures that I have here, this is the entirety of the actual policy text. So you have to, they recommend that you should confirm the accuracy of the output provided by Gen AI tools, and then check the tools for bias. Most importantly, I think, is disclosing the use of generative AI tools wherever it's been used, and if it falls under all of these other sort of thresholds or boundary conditions that have been set. And then some other legal stuff about malicious content and intellectual property rights, right? And responses should not be used to train the system. So this little policy from Columbia is an example of what a university policy for use or non-use could look like. So you could directly link within your syllabus a direct university policy. And then if you have any specific iterations that fall within these boundary conditions, you can also list that on your syllabus page as well. Let's look at an outcome of non-use where you yourself have to draft a policy for non-use of AI. Okay, so this is an example of a course that I'm working on, or where students are working on a lab project, right? So this is the statement that was created for them to adhere to in some way. So in all lab activities for this course, the use of AI is strictly prohibited. This applies to all aspects of the final lab project, including whatever 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Because this is a group project, it's important that you hold your teammates accountable in upholding this policy. If we think that there's been use of AI, then the entire group will receive no credit, right? So there's a clear consequence aspect to it. While this language is pretty punitive in nature, you can think about how you can use language that doesn't appear to be as aggressive, for the lack of a better word, right? And we should all be keeping track of our collaborative work, and every person in the group is responsible for ensuring that the other group members adhere to the AI policy, right? So it's creating some form of accountability within the group amongst the students, as opposed to us reinforcing the hierarchical structure of faculty telling them what to do, right? And then if you have any concerns about the possible use of AI, please reach out to us in time before you actually make a submission. And then we actually got students to sign their physical names as a pledge on this document, right? Under this particular last line, which is in bold and italicized. We pledge that we will not use AI in any way while working on this group project. Of course, I mean, I'm sure some of you are thinking that, oh, does this really matter? And people, are they really going to adhere by it, the students? But that's really not the point. It's about reinforcing that idea that you're taking this pledge and it's a commitment to not using this, because the alternate way in which you're going to do it is going to benefit you, right? So this is what an outcome two strategy could look like for non-use. And now I have this other term, unuse. I'm not really sure what the difference between non-use and unuse is really yet, but I think that it has something to do with undoing of use, is unuse. And so these are two sample statements that I have here, right? So on top, you can see there's an AI zero level use sort of policy. The goal of this policy is to encourage students to develop their own understanding of and fluency with the material. The learning objectives of this course are such that the use of generative AI tools will hinder your learning in this course, right? Again, pay attention to the specific language that is being communicated to the students. For this reason, the use of any generative AI tools is not allowed and will be considered a violation of whatever honor code you would like to call it, right? And then you can specify use cases of where you're limiting it or not limiting it, right? Right, revising your work, summarizing ideas, that's things that you should not use it for, right? But then also you can have a caveat. So, for example, if you have international students who might not have English as their first language, you can tell them that they can come to you and speak to you if they have any translation issues, for example, they would like to use a tool for that purpose. So again, we don't need to be punitive in its entirety, but there will be differential solutions to differential problems and differential students and a diverse set of students, right? This other statement here is like tips to disincentivize or to reduce the incentives of using AI in unauthorized ways, right? And what strategies that we can use as educators or as faculty to sort of remind students about this. So I think point number 3 is particularly important to me, which is that this is not a one-off discussion. It's not a one-time point discussion. It's an evolving conversation that needs to happen through the semester. Attitudes can change. Yeah, there's just so much going on, right? And then it's this idea of normalizing the idea of your students struggling, right? This kind of, I mean, as long as the struggle is at a level of good stress and not bad stress, it's a good thing, I guess. But normalize some of that struggle, but not all of it. This will hopefully reduce their incentive to use a generative AI. Yeah, and then also providing students with alternatives to AI tools, right? Like there are other sources for the same piece of information. There are other people who have written blogs. There are other forms of media that exist out there, right? There's several other ways in which you can get that information. Um, so yeah, that's what I have for outcome 2 for unused, some of the sample language. And let's go to limited use now. This is again, this is specifying what types of use is appropriate for your course, right? So help in summarizing large amounts of text, for example, before you go back and reread for accuracy and deeper understanding. Blind spot monitoring, creating a template or an outline for assignments. Or you can use Gen AI to learn about specific topics if you're having a conversation to learn more about it, right? Or if you don't truly understand what you learned in class and why what you're being told in class is different from what you've learned online somewhere, you can have that conversation to help clarify your thinking or students' thinking as well. And then, of course, correcting spelling and grammar is also potentially an appropriate use case if you selected outcome 3. So now this, I wasn't sure if I should limit this, if I should label this slide as outcome 3 extent of use or limited use. But this basically highlights what the upper limit is, like what is really not appropriate. Right. So some uses that are not appropriate for your course would be submitting text just generated by an AI service without attribution and without editing, or giving AI tools direct assignment prompts and getting them to answer for you. Right. So these are the use cases of what you would not be open to doing or not allow students to do as part of your syllabus, right? And here you can reiterate the idea of double loop learning, right? Which is something that we've covered extensively here at Cafe and in our courses on the teaching certificate, which is that there's not always just this one source of information, right? We learn and then we relearn because there are other pieces of information around us. And it's just trying to say that information is not only unidirectional and of one way, right? That's the idea. But here in this outcome 3, for those of you who chose outcome 3, I would like you to specify what is meant by limited use, right? We don't want it to be an ambiguous term that no student understands what you're talking about. So maybe you could assign levels to limited use. Maybe levels 1 to 3, 1 to 5, 1 to 7, anything, right? And see how far people want to go with this idea of limited use. So this is some sample language from the Cafe 430 course that I'm presently teaching with Dr. Sarah Holler, who's the instructor for that course, right? So this is the extent of use sort of statement that we use, kind of. At least this is the goal setting part of the statement. So the goal of this policy is to allow students to use generative AI tools in their learning while retaining intellectual ownership and primary effort of their work, right? The most important thing being intellectual ownership and primary effort. You are allowed to use generative AI tools to give you an access point to complicated course material or polish your work, but the main ideas and work should be the result of your own effort, right? And then you can also justify, because much of this work in this class is meant for you to develop a sense of yourself as an educator. Outsourcing too much of the work to AI could undermine the value of this course, right? So remind them why you're putting this policy in place, not just that this is the policy and you've got to do. And then let's move to this outcome, which is the open use of AI, right? So the goal of this policy is to openly allow students to use generative AI tools in their learning. I know in the poll that we just did, we had two people in this particular webinar who said that they would recommend an open use of AI policy. So this is some of the language that you could use, that generative AI tools can be used for brainstorming and developing ideas, seeking alternative explanations, summarizing research sources, revising writing, checking for work, and translating text. But again, let me remind you, and you can see in the last statement, right? Like, please keep in mind that AI tools aren't reliable sources of information. So you need to be careful when relying on this output in any context, particularly in higher education, especially when like a scientific field, right? And you're going to publish and stuff, you can't make claims that are solely based on that one source. Um, so just because you're permitted to use AI doesn't mean it is the best tool for the job. And here I want to highlight this sort of argument about, I mean, it's like a debate kind of, but the idea that people equate the addition of AI tools into higher education as like the addition of like the calculator way back. But the point is that 10 different calculators from 10 different companies and maybe even 10 different countries would give you the same result. But that's not something that we're seeing right now with generative AI tools, right? You ask the same question to different tools and you will get differing responses. And that's why we need to be particularly careful. And maybe you can highlight that in your policy as well. And just to round up our discussion, I just want to briefly say, in conclusion, we need to question the institution for putting out a policy or not putting out a policy. We need to think critically as the instructors ourselves, communicate effectively with students being the most important, and then keep revisiting the discussion throughout the course, right? And there are two reflection questions that I want to leave you with for you to reflect on your own time before I open the floor to discussion and questions. How could you adapt this framework to the course of your choice? And how do you feel about this major change in the classroom and the dilemma of use, unuse that you face? Um, Thank you all for joining. I hope that was useful and productive. Um, and yeah, please, I would love to open it up for questions. Yes, Marisol, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Not so much a question, but more of a comment. I think a lot of the things that you brought up, especially with the language and the examples, were so helpful. I teach for LACCD at a community college, and I think one of the things that a lot of faculty right now are very in panic mode. I think a lot of them are very afraid of, students are not learning, and but it is you can't avoid the inevitable. So I think for me, even having the examples of guiding them, right? Putting something in the syllabus as far as, this is how we're encouraging you. However, going back to, of course, them thinking critically and, just using their own thoughts and rather than relying on that, because ultimately they're not going to grow from that. So that's something, me as a Chicano Studies faculty member, I think approaching it from a positive aspect, because the reality is we know they're using it. Even faculty, it helps us, right? Even with organization, things like that. So it's something that we can't avoid. But I just found it helpful. So I want to thank you for just, the language, the examples, because it is something that, it's something that we have to deal with and we can't shy away from.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Marisol. Yeah, I feel like, I mean, a lot of us as educators, also as graduate students, we don't want to talk about it because we might not agree with it, but it's almost like inevitable and it's like so in our face already. Um, Students are ahead of us in terms of the conversations about this, right? So we almost need to catch up in some way. So thank you so much for your comments. I really appreciate that. Yes, Dr. Salibian, sorry I did not put the reflection questions in the chat. Um, just a second.
I also have a comment. Um, I teach also at the community college, and I have a no AI use policy in my class. And I explained to the students that the no use of AI is on everything that they're going to be graded for. So they're able to use AI in whatever ways they want for things that they're not being graded, but not if they're going to be graded for an assignment, then they shouldn't use AI for that. And so that allows the students to look up concepts, you know, anything that they still need to review to learn from, and then do their own work for their assignment. And I still find that a lot of students use it anyway. So it's really a challenge um, with students using it and then not knowing what's happening with their learning. So I think that's kind of the disconnect. That's where it lies for me. That we could use it for learning and it does help, but how students use it and us not being able to see or to assess, did they learn anything from it? That's a challenge. So I do the no AI to encourage them to do their own thinking and their own writing and everything. And many of them still use it. And I could tell because of the way it's written. It's like words that are not even in the textbook. They're not in my lectures. Like they're like advanced. I teach statistics, and so they use like all this advanced like summaries of results and things like that. And so I think that's why I lean towards the no use because I know that they're still going to do it and I don't have a way to enforce it or to even evaluate if any learning happened. And so it's just, you know, it's hard.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Norma. I mean, yeah, I think that's very relatable um, in terms of not being able to identify what's going on and how to sort of enforce it. But sometimes I ask myself the question that if I'm not being able to enforce it and there's so much use of it, then maybe the policy needs to adapt in some way, right? If
Yeah.
I don't know, if the needs of the students are like that. Um, yeah, and then maybe I know for statistics it's pretty tough because I'm facing the same problem teaching statistics right now is I can't tell when they've done the work themselves versus not. Um, I think maybe encouraging them to cite the use of a particular tool or actually telling them to add an acknowledgement statement if they do end up using it. Um, maybe that's the solution, but yeah, not sure. Thank
Yeah, it's just that since I have a no use
No
policy,
use policy.
then
Yeah.
they're not supposed to write. So it's like it would be contradicting if I said, add the if you do use it, you know, add this. So we'll get there. I mean, we'll figure out a way. I think I am waiting for research that compares AI use and non-AI use learning and what's happening to learning.
Mhm.
I'm sure people are doing it and or have done it even. If anyone has suggestions of actual research that has been done, experimental, that would be great.
Thank you. Yes, Alan, please.
Um, I really appreciate, the session and being able to think about it a little bit more. And I know JJ had sent out for those in Claremont Graduate University. I guess we're having a discussion, I think, on Thursday about from the students to the administration what our I guess our thoughts are on AI use. So I think that's going to be an interesting discussion and then framed by this. So that's nice as well. For I don't have the answers for sure, but I definitely think at least it seems like it's going to be this ubiquitous tool. It already is that people use all the time in the workplace. And so it's kind of like going from, you can't use any notes, you can't use your book to open book tests, right? And professors have gone that method. It's like, well, and look, in the real world, if you're going to write a report on something in your business, you're going to have all the access. You're not going to have to do it all from memory. You're going to have all that access to that material in front of you, and you should. Um, so, it's almost kind of the same thing. This is a tool that you're going to have. So you better learn how to use it well now and ethically now so that when you're in the workforce, you can use it ethically in your workplace as well. And so how do you create those policies in your classroom to kind of enhance that ability in an ethical manner? If you can use it ethically now, maybe you use it ethically when you get into the real world. Again, I don't have the answers, but for me, I think that's where my head goes.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I think that's fascinating in terms of like how the language for that would look like. Um, I'm not sure. Yeah, it's almost like trial and error, right, at this point. Um, yeah, but I'm really glad that we're having this conversation, and that you all could join. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm going to try to sh put the slides on the cafe website where we have the list of all the webinars along with the recordings. Um, yes, and thank you so much for joining for the sake of time, and it's 1 p.m. I'm going to let you all maybe eat some lunch.